Hi, it's Grant Bailey from Enable Deposit Solutions, and today I'm joined by Dominic Cavagnino from Benari Property, Head of Research at Benari Property.
Yep.
So appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us today. So the Gold Coast market, I just want to get an idea on where you think, based on your knowledge and research, the Gold Coast market might be heading in 2025, and if it's if you're going to put your own money somewhere, it's the Gold Coast market somewhere you'd put your money. But I suppose to start with, to take a step back and see where the market's gone. And Gold Coast effectively is that sort of, 40K strip from the border north to...
Pretty much, yeah.
I don't know, north to where, I'm not too sure, Labrador or something like that?
Yeah, about that. It sort of stretches, and to be honest, that whole region is kind of growing and sort of merging closer and closer to Brisbane.
It is a unique area in Australia. It is a narrow strip. It is a population of about 750,000 people.
Yeah.
It does swell. I think it goes up by 500,000, et cetera, during the holiday periods from people from the southern states going there. So it does have a big rental market, indeed a big short-term rental market.
Yeah.
Whether it's hotels or Airbnb and things like that. So, but as I said, just to take a step back, what's the market done up there in the last few years?
The Gold Coast has been really strong. I mean, since it really started in that COVID period where you had massive numbers of migrants coming out of Victoria, New South Wales, even Brisbane, moving to Gold Coast, sunny coast to take advantage of that sort of coastal lifestyle. It was probably the biggest benefactor of that sort of movement for the sea change, sort of lifestyle change type thing. And it's continued to perform quite strongly. I think one of my initial concerns was that people would all flock there, and then, you'd have to go back to the offices for work, and everyone would sort of exodus out of there, and they'd bring on a lot of supply, and it would sort of not be able to cope. But it's actually done really well. Following then, it's continued to strengthen. I think the area of the Gold Coast where I've seen the strongest kind of performance is that sort of luxury apartment market on the beachfront, on the coastline. And obviously there's, quite a long stretch of your ability to buy those types of properties with those kind of, great views and things like that. But probably also the fact that sort of broad beach area, those types of pockets of the Gold Coast, we've seen a massive increase in awesome restaurants, just things that will really draw people to the area. One of the things it always lacked was it didn't really have that. You kind of had
it didn't have that diversity, whereas I think now it's got quite a diversity along the wider strip of the coast.
Yeah.
Diversity, whether it's restaurants, but also entertainment and things like that.
Yeah.
So I think it's quite a unique place in Australia, actually.
It is, yeah. And I think for that reason, it'll continue to do well. I mean, probably one of the things that has helped the Gold Coast in a way is that it's not been overly easy to bring on new supply in the last few years. Yeah. So, it's kind of kept supply down, because one of the things the Gold Coast doesn't really have is any restrictions on what you can build and how big you can build it, kind of thing. So whereas other places around the country, it kind of seems to be they're a bit more constrained around their rulings with that sort of stuff. So
we've got that on the Sunshine Coast, for example. It's much more height restricted in terms of how high you can go.
Correct.
There.
Yeah.
But then again, it's the Sunshine Coast, great part of Queensland, but it's just a different vibe, and there's just not the diversity there. It's more of a retirement sort of place. I get a vibe for the Sunshine Coast. It feels more laid back.
Feels that way, yeah. I think the Gold Coast is very much becoming a hub on its own.
Yeah,
it used to rely a lot on Brisbane. I think you used to have a lot of people traveling to and from. You still have a lot of people doing that, but
well, it's a city in its own right. I think
100%. Yeah, it's really started to improve. So, and I think led by things that make it a more attractive place to live. From a lifestyle point of view, people often underestimate the impact of having some good restaurants and things pop in, some great cafes, and it just makes it a more of a place that people want to settle in and live in, I suppose. So the Gold Coast, to be honest, it's been really strong, and it continues to be so. The biggest challenge is now the entry point to get into these types of properties, which were once upon a time fairly affordable, are now getting to a point where they are quite expensive because they're so desirable.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing is that you go back 5 or certainly 10 years, you could easily get properties, 2-bedroom apartments under $1 million, whereas now it's a struggle to find anything under $1 million. Apartments for sale.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I'm talking new apartments in I think
better areas.
What shows this sort of strength or resilience of the Gold Coast is in the recent last couple of years, like places like Byron have seen a reasonable drop in their prices. They had a really big spike through those COVID years, and then I think there was something I read the other day that sort of said Byron's down about 25% in some cases. The Gold Coast isn't, so the Gold Coast is only an hour away, but it obviously seems to have handled that sort of post-COVID period a lot better than what some of the other markets that had really strong runs during that period. And it's probably due to its connectivity to sort of Brisbane, as well. And the fact that there is that big employment base, which is only an hour or so away, that you can access, as well as having its own growing in sort of employment base. So, I think, anywhere from, kind of that Burleigh, or even just south of Burleigh, Coolangatta all the way up kind of thing has been seen as being really attractive.
Well, there's a lot of education facilities there now. There's a lot of transport construction going on with the light rail, et cetera, going down to Burleigh Heads. That's going to be extended. And, of course, in the medical profession, there's a lot of hospitals and things like that up there. So it is a city in its own right. As you say, it's not sort of doesn't piggyback off Brisbane like it used to a decade or so ago. Yeah,
it's not completely reliant. It can stand up on its own 2 feet kind of thing. And now the Brisbane, it's kind of like a Newcastle in a way of Sydney, where it's very much a city in its own right, but still benefits from the connectivity to Sydney as well. Right. I think the Gold Coast is very much a city on its own right, but another benefit to it is that it still is, connected to kind of Brisbane as a capital city as well.
Okay. So how do you see it performing moving forward in 2025? Do you see those fundamentals remaining in place? And
yeah, I think the fundamentals sort of remain quite strong. I mean, Queensland is getting a massive amount of interstate migration. No doubt a large proportion of that will continue to go to the Gold Coast because of its lifestyle. I speak to people quite frequently who, have the Gold Coast in mind as a place where they'd like to get to or retire in at some point.
Right.
So I think you naturally have a lot of people who want to go up there for the climate, the lifestyle and all that sort of thing. Queensland as a state is still taking on a massive amount of migrants coming out of Sydney and is getting a lot of that overseas migration. And the Gold Coast, Brisbane and Sunny Coast will share that. But I think the Gold Coast is still going to take a large chunk of it and that'll hold that market in good stead. And I don't see it really from a supply point of view. It's still quite tricky to bring on new supply. And the supply that's being brought on is very different to what was brought on historically. You're getting a lot more of those luxurious kind of properties where the entry point isn't there for, a large proportion of investors. So you're getting more of a mix of owner occupiers buying too, which is obviously great for that market. Yeah.
Well, certainly you look at the square meter rate you can purchase out on the Gold Coast, whether it's on the beach or back from the beach, but you can certainly on the beach purchase at a square meter rate around that 25 to 30,000 a square meter. If you go to the same sort of places in Sydney, you're talking 60, 80, $90,000 a square meter. So your square meter rate's certainly substantially less on the Gold Coast.
Yeah.
And I think, so I think that has an attractiveness in and of itself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in Sydney, we're quite limited, right? Where you can buy property that's that close to the beach and offers that kind of lifestyle, and the price point to get it is a lot higher still. So, even though the Gold Coast has done really well and you might be spending $4 or $5 million on a really nice 3-bedroom apartment overlooking the ocean, you compare that to Sydney and it's still relatively quite affordable in comparison, I suppose.
Okay.
So I think that leaves a lot more value on the table for the Gold Coast.
So just to finish off with, from an investor's perspective, does the Gold Coast, because as an investor, I'm not going to be paying $4 or $5 million for a beachfront apartment. So if I'm investing around that 1 to 2 million range, even maybe the 800,000 to 1.5 million.
Yeah.
There's certainly, from what I glean out of the market up there, there's certainly projects, off-the-plan projects that aren't going to get off the ground for a variety of reasons. I mean, there's the drain of workers to the infrastructure that the government's doing, and the lack of developers, or lack of builders rather, that can actually build the projects to get them out of the ground. So developing's one thing, building's another, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean the development's going to get out of the ground. So I think for that reason, would you agree that there's going to be that restraint in supply moving forward on the Gold Coast?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's going to be constrained supply. I think the crucial thing when you're buying, no matter where it is, and the Gold Coast included, is have some element of point of difference. I suppose if you're buying into a new development, consider what is the level of owner occupiers purchasing in there? What is the offering from an amenity point of view? How close am I to the sort of lifestyle things that people in the Gold Coast really want to benefit from? So I think as long as you keep that mindset, which is the same no matter where you're buying, that's going to help you to make sure you're buying the right types of properties in the Gold Coast, because there will always be variations in the performance. Sure. Even if you're buying apartments in neighbouring suburbs, there can be things that drive a variation. Buying properties that are of a larger size or have a lot of natural light and face a nice aspect and things like that. You might not be able to get the ocean facing apartment at the 1 sort of to 1.5 mark, but you are still able to make sure that you can get some of those other things right, which will hold you in sort of good stead longer term. And I think the market itself will continue to remain strong. There's no real signs of it weakening effectively.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, Dominic, appreciate your time and your insights today.
No, thank you.